All right, so let's start from the beginning. What is TBEST? So a software tool providing transit data analytics and insights to support transit service and strategic planning initiatives, including transit development plans, operational analysis, grant applications, which is a very widely used tool. TBEST is widely used for grant applications, throughout many agencies. FDA Title VI reporting, we talked about that in terms of equity analysis, optimization studies, mobility analysis, mobility on demand, and really much more. And we'll get into a lot of those different areas where TBEST can help support your everyday transit planning needs. So what we want to do in this initial overview is talk about some of the core functions and give you just a brief overview of those core functions and talk a little bit how those core areas would support the TDP or operational analysis. So the 6 areas that we feel are kind of our core functions are obviously transit demand estimation, socioeconomic and land use market analysis, mobility area tools, transit network and GTFS editor, network accessibility analysis, and equity analysis. So all of those kind of core framework of tools would support the elements of a TDP and COAs, or operational planning analysis. So the first thing we want to do is really set the stage in terms of how FDOT manages a TDP. And generally that's, as I mentioned, every 5 years, the agencies are required to submit their major TDP updates. And FDOT has provided a handbook for doing that, which has guidance for preparing or reviewing TDP submissions. So what we have in TBEST is that's already part of the TDP handbook is guidance on how to use TBEST for ridership estimation. And that has long been kind of the core feature of TBEST since its beginning 20 years ago, was the ability to forecast ridership. But since then, we've found that there are many needs that agencies have that they really don't have at their fingertips to be able to do different service level summaries and market evaluations, a lot of things we talked about, equity analysis. So over those 20-year span, we have developed lots of tools that have kind of formed around the model application and scenario development to perform lots of other analytical features. So what we want to do is expand upon the TDP handbook in terms of what TBEST can support when you're developing your TDP. And in a recent interview with HDR personnel who were performing TDP development for several transit agencies in the Florida Panhandle, they estimated that TBEST can support up to 75% of the data reporting and analysis required for the TDP. Now, that's a very significant chunk of that analytical data that you would otherwise have to put into your own context and develop data from scratch, where TBEST can automatically do some of these for you. So what we want to do is a lot of the focus today is going to be not only to say, yes, we can do more with TBEST, but connect it to the handbook and say, what elements of the handbook can you complete with TBEST? Okay, so just as an overview and kind of the connection I just mentioned between the TBEST feature and then what's required within a TDP in Florida. So I realize there's lots of folks outside of Florida on the call today, but we will be specific to Florida in many cases, but I will expand outside of Florida in many cases as well. So just so you know that too. So this table kind of represents that connection with how you can support your TDP using TBEST. And so you see that there is the ridership projections, the transit demand estimation in the first line. And really that's in the handbook already, right? So that's fine, you have guidance in the handbook. But where we're expanding this is to look at land use market analysis, which is section 3.1 baseline conditions assessment in the handbook. Socio-Economic market analysis, this is section 8.2, transit network and editor in GTFS, would be your situational appraisal, as well as SE growth rates would be a situational appraisal in section 5.2. Transit network accessibility in section 3.6, and mobility areas is a county or jurisdictional service profile in 3.2. Okay, so in terms of some of these core features, so we're going to go over some of the core features. I'm going to kind of make this light because it is just an overview. But it's really just to say that some of these are available to you within TBEST, and all of them are default features within TBEST that are come right out of the box. So just in terms of the transit demand estimation, TBEST contains a direct demand micro-level model which simulates transit ridership at the stop level by time of day. So that includes both direct and transfer boardings estimations. And so what you have are equations that estimate ridership at every stop. And when I say stop, that's unique stop by route pattern. So it's not a stop as in it serves multiple route patterns. Each individual pattern will receive a ridership estimation. TBEST automatically generates reports summarizing and comparing transit ridership estimation results. So this is something that Susan just mentioned in her question is, can I get reports out of TBEST to help me with communicating the results to my my decision makers? And yes, this is a great way to do that, is some of these comparative analysis results inside of TBEST. And TBEST is designed for testing different transit service concepts with future socioeconomic conditions. So what this is saying is, so uniqueness of TBEST is that you get to use your TBEST network editor to change the network, but you're also going to test your travel demand estimation relative to future growth. So it's not just the population and employment and land use that's on the ground right now. You're able to modify that for future conditions. So that's one of the key elements of TBEST as well, is you have future service that's tied to future land use and socioeconomic market conditions. Okay, so there is also a socioeconomic land use market analysis tool that's very robust that allows you to summarize intensity and distribution of land use, demographic, socioeconomic, and employment data covered by transit networks. And so what that would be is just a, generally, if you're doing this from kind of a default range here, is just a buffer around a route or a pattern or a stop or multiple stops that would give you the intensity of the markets around it. So the markets can be relative to population, employment, and Title VI variables, household variables in terms of vehicle ownership, et cetera. So there's probably about 70 or 80 variables that are available within TBEST relative to socioeconomic conditions. And all of those are sourced from different data sources, and we'll talk about the specifics of them, but generally ACS, Census, ACS, LEHD, or your MPO TAZs, and you can also have custom data sets. So one of the unique things about TBEST is it doesn't have to be just a buffer around a route. You can put any geography into TBEST. And we also have, and I'll talk about just in a minute, the ability to do sheds. So walk sheds, bike sheds, and drive sheds, and more. So the geographic context of this matters in terms of, around a route would be a basic kind of analysis, but you can do much more with this as well. And you can generate reports and maps directly within TBEST, export any of this data and visualizations directly to GIS/ArcGIS, ArcGIS Online, Excel, and PowerPoint. So we have lots of tools for getting this data out of TBEST into your environment. Okay, so we mentioned that there is the ability to use GTFS and bring that into TBEST, and then use the TBEST Transit Network Editor to make changes to a network, right? So you have both the ability to say, I want my agency GTFS, I want my full network into the TBEST environment where I can use it for analysis. And I also want to be able to edit that inside of TBEST, which TBEST gives you the full complement of tools to change, route locations, add routes, move stops, add new stops, and add new route pattern alignments and service levels as well. So one of the great things about TBEST is that you can use a GTFS from any source. It doesn't have to be your agency source. It could be from another software tool that you have as a GTFS. You can bring that into TBEST. You can also bring in data from regional providers. So if you are in South Florida and maybe Broward County Transit, and you have routes which cross over into Palm Beach County or Miami-Dade County, you can use their routes that integrate with yours to show full accessibility of your routes into other regions. So basically a kind of a regional network availability as well. So lots of tools to do that. Another key element of this, as far as the GTFS import is concerned, is that you have the ability to integrate APC stop level ridership data into your GTFS and bring that into TBEST for analysis. So we're going to talk a good bit about actual observed ridership data and how you use that inside of TBEST to analyze your operations and your service and performance in multiple contexts. So one of the elements of TBEST is that once you do make an edit inside of the network editor, is that you can export a GTFS as well. So you have the ability to say, well, I've made all these edits inside of TBEST, changed the service, did all this, and I want to be able to use that outside of TBEST. You can export a GTFS from TBEST and then use that in other softwares such as the FTA stops model or other softwares that consume a GTFS. Okay. Okay, so another core area of TBEST is transit network accessibility. So this is accessibility through the transit network from any location. It could be a single stop, it could be multiple stops, it could be from a geographic area as the source. And what you show is the accessibility through the transit network to destinations given a default composite travel time. And when I say composite travel time, I mean it takes into the components of wait time, transfer time, walk time, etc. That would be your full accessibility to destinations. And what you see is that the output for this is relative to heat maps. We also have transfer maps as well. And the idea is that you summarize your population and employment destinations from individual locations to say, I have X number of people or jobs that are accessible from a particular location via transit, given a certain travel time from a location or multiple locations. So the output on this is generally a heat map, but you can also do other types of market analysis, your general market analysis as well. And you can also dynamically filter some of the variables that go into this. So if you only want to show one transfer destinations, you can show just one transfer or zero transfer or two transfers. And you can also produce really great maps with this as well. So the example here is the HART used this particular graphic in public meetings for their TDP. And the graphic is how long does it take to get there on transit. So they use TBEST at particular activity centers such as the downtown Tampa or the airport to say, where can I get to on transit, and display that for multiple locations and use that as guidance for a public involvement. So I thought this was a really great application of this tool that can be used in a way that you wouldn't necessarily see how TBEST could be used. This isn't ridership estimation, this is network accessibility. So this is a great additional tool that you can use to support many different areas of analysis for your transit network. So another core area is equity analysis. So primarily what TBEST will do is support FTA's guidance for both triennial reporting and disparate impact analysis. So a lot of what TBEST does is kind of geared towards pushing data out into a format for equity analysis that meets FTA's guidance and requirements. So that means calculating system and route level percent disadvantaged populations, minority and low income designated routes. So if you've ever calculated a minority route in terms of what FTA's guidance is, it can be very difficult to do. And in terms of, and at time, it takes a lot of time to do that. So TBEST automatically does that for you and will report out all of your, minority and low income route designations, along with many other things as well. And also the disparate impact analysis is something that is, quite complicated as well. It's not simple to do, and it takes some, kind of procedural elements to do that. So TBEST does this through the equity analysis and the disparate impact analysis through a wizard. So you're able to easily step through a wizard and get maps and reports and even a dashboard that will help you interpret the results of your equity analysis. Okay, so our next core area is mobility area analysis. And this is kind of the transformation of data, into the geographic context within TBEST. So when we say mobility area, it can define many, many things. It could be a traditional quarter-mile walk buffer. It can be a mobility area, a quarter-mile walk shed that we use the route network, the road network, the sidewalk network to calculate a walk shed from locations along a route. It can also be a bike shed, a wheelchair shed, a drive shed. We even have transit sheds that you can calculate as well. And it's meant to show the service inside of these sheds, market analysis inside of these sheds, as well as being able to kind of tie them into other analysis features that might be more multimodal features, such as can you analyze the first mile, last mile options from transit stops, analyzing mobility on demand zones using these mobility areas. So tomorrow we will be touching on some of those as well, how to use TBEST to do that. So what these sheds allows us to do is kind of tie in the transit network service to other modes of access and accessibility. And it's a really great tool. We'll go over it in depth, but it also allows you to do something, and the kind of the bottom left corner graphic is transit routes within a 15-minute drive shed to downtown. So it allows you to summarize your service and performance inside of an area. So you define what that area is as a mobility area. It could be a drive shed. It could be all of Duval County. In this case, the lower right is all of Duval County. And so it allows you to kind of summarize this. So if you're doing a corridor, let's say, and you want to summarize what is my existing performance and in terms of transit service and transit performance inside of that corridor, TBEST does that automatically. It will tell you. So some of these things that would take you a good amount of time to do on your own, TBEST does them automatically. And I think that's where we want to get across to you in some of these overviews, that this is automating a lot of these processes that as an analyst you can find difficult to perform or time consuming to perform. So just in terms of, we talked a little bit about the TDP and how connecting that to what TBEST features, but we also want to talk about how you connect it to operational and planning analysis. So you can see this table where you have a TBEST feature and the COA or planning application, which goes into a lot of what TBEST does, some of what we've already talked about in terms of equity analysis and network accessibility, but also some newer items to talk about, such as TBEST BRT adjustments. So we'll get into some details on that, but essentially you're able to designate routes as BRTs and then add additional scoring to them based on the implementation characteristics of the BRT you're planning to implement. So that's also an application feature of TBEST. There is something new to TBEST 4.7, which is the bus stop balancing tool, which allows you to score stops for removal on a particular route or within a particular geography, so that you're able to prioritize stop removal if you're looking at kind of balancing your stops and make sure you don't have too much coverage, or kind of weed out your stops that aren't as productive. You also have a query tool in TBEST, which will cover the APC ridership and integration. That's the stop level ridership that we talked about that you can use to perform lots of analysis in TBEST. Route and system service summary, the network editor we talked about where you can edit the transit routes. We also have a parcel scenario editor. So one of the key inputs to TBEST is land use data, which is at the parcel level. And so you would configure this for what your observed conditions would be. But TBEST also gives you the ability to make changes to that parcel data so that it reflects a future year context. So there's a parcel editor that you can use to do that, and that might be for transit or impact TODs and planned development impacts or identifying future service opportunities. And then of course we talked about the market analysis where there's lots of applications for that as well. Okay, so just one of the final kind of core features that we have is our operational planning analysis primarily for comprehensive operational analysis / COA, right? So whenever we say COA, that's what we're talking about as a comprehensive operational analysis. And this is where you would look at more what's present in your transit network and the service levels, the performance, et cetera, of what's there. And then maybe looking at making some changes to your system that would be reflected in the very near term, the kind of the 0-year kind of implementation. So, so there's lots of tools to do this, including the APC ridership integration. And we have a tool, a workflow support tool that will allow you to look at this jurisdictionally as well. So basically taking in a shapefile of any shapefile, let's say that you have of municipalities or rural versus non-rural taxable areas, and then breaking up your service and performance to match those areas so that all you're doing is taking a TBEST scenario in terms of your network, adding a shapefile, and then summarizing, merging them together and summarizing by jurisdiction, right? So this jurisdictional analysis is a really a big part of how we see TBEST or agencies looking at their data so that it's broken up by geography as opposed to specifically at the route level or maybe some other context. So we also have a route density analysis in that tool as well. And I mentioned the bus stop balancing tool that you can use as well. Okay, so just to put this all together and just kind of how we do this in TBEST, right? So TBEST has a transit planning framework. So if you can see this, and I'll try to annotate this a little bit, so as we're going, we can do this. So this upper box here, actually I wanted to do this, the system development box, I need to clear that off, oh my gosh. Okay, so the system development box here is where we're going to talk mostly about this morning. So we're going to talk about a TBEST transit system, some of the data inputs that go into the transit systems, talk a little bit about the model structures as well, how to define the service area, the base network development, the model validation. So this is kind of your original build of your data that would take you into the application mode. And you build application scenarios here as your flow through to extend operating hours, add stops, decrease headway, add new routes, do no build scenarios, change fare, increase socioeconomic growth, realign routes, remove routes, all of the things that you would expect to do relative to transit planning and changing your service can be done as part of an application scenario. Then you would push that data through the analysis engines that we talked about, the ridership estimation, market analysis, network accessibility, et cetera. And those once you perform that analysis, you get into lots of different reports that would help you tell the story of your service change and what you're trying to communicate, whether it's to your colleagues as planners, whether it's to the decision makers or to the public. The ability to produce reports in TBEST and then subsequently get that data out of TBEST and into another framework such as ArcGIS or Excel or even PowerPoint or a GTFS file, however you would want to work with it outside of TBEST, that you can then take it from there in your own planning methodology. So this is the framework that we have in TBEST for this transit planning. And what I would say about this is that it's flexible. It's not something where you have to meet this stringent, step A step 1, 2, 3, there's a lot of diversions that take place in transit planning and a lot of tools that are needed in order to answer the different questions that come up. And what we kind of consider TBEST to be is a Swiss Army knife of transit planning, where you can get to a lot of those out of the box questions and answer them pretty readily within TBEST, or create the data framework and the data that you need, and then move outside of TBEST to do a little more and answer additional questions. So one of the elements of that is being able to import GIS and GTFS data into TBEST, edit it inside of TBEST, and then export it. So that's kind of one of those key out-of-the-box framework type of procedures. You're going data in, make a manipulation or analysis, and pushing it back out. So one of the other areas that we have in TBEST that's new to TBEST 4.7 is the scripting and add-in engine, where you can use the TBEST API to actually create your own tools in terms of workflow support tools that would address local planning questions or issues. And it could be anything. So actually the bus stop balancing tool that I just mentioned is an add-in. It is something that was developed for a secondary process, a workflow process that we found was very useful, and we ended up integrating it into the overall TBEST for everyone to use. So this add-in process where you have the scripting available to you, you can build your own script to use the API for TBEST to do a unique application, and then use the add-in tool to distribute it to other users. So that is the end of that section. So I think there are several comments that came up, Matt.
Yes, there's, I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but there's a lot of questions about the mobility areas and what source they use and what you can bring in terms of your own data through the mobility areas. So I'm not sure if you want to answer all of them. I kind of spat out some responses about mobility areas that uses an API. Open Route Service doesn't require any additional data import to create these kind of mobility sheds, but we'll go over more of it in day 2. So yeah.
Okay, all right. So
And in the chat, please feel free to let me know if I'm not answering your question. There's a lot of people typing, so I might have mixed a few responses there.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just reading down through. It's okay. We have TDPs too. Section numbers are different, but content is much the same. Yes. So definitely outside of Florida, we're targeting Florida here, but obviously a lot of folks are outside. So yeah, a lot of the tools that were developed can be merged into any different TDP. They're very common in terms of how you would apply them. So we're referencing specifically the Florida TDP, but obviously that would be relative to your guidance for your state or your local area. What else do we have? Yeah, so Zev asks, will we be including custom data sets? And yes, so any data can come into TBEST in terms of a shapefile, or it takes a lot of different inputs. So we'll talk about that during the days, today and tomorrow, how you get different data into TBEST. He also asks, are these walk and drive sheds isochrones or distance from stops? There are isochrones.
And Maurice Tool asked privately to me, can you filter for ADA and CTV zones in the network accessibility? And what elements of ADA and CTV do you bring into TBEST, and how can you analyze those?
Yeah, we don't do a lot with ADA, Maurice, in terms of being able to specify that. I think we do have some amenity flags that you can set at the stop level for the different boarding types. If you have wheelchair access, let's say, at a particular stop, you can definitely flag that at a stop location. So that would be one element of that. Plus the mobility areas, if you have, particular areas you were analyzed relative to ADA zones or particular stops that are ADA, then that's something you can do in TBEST. But we're always looking for new ways to apply TBEST. So if you're thinking of something specific that you want to do, then feel free to chat that.
Matthew Lehane asks, what is the Open Route Service API that TBEST uses?
It is an open API that is, if you go to their website, openrouteservice.org, pardon me, then you can read all about it. But essentially, we pull the OpenStreetMap data in via the Open Route Service API. And so that's something that, you can look up on their website and find out more about what they do. But it is a free service, so that's really good. And we have a certain number of hits per day that we can access through that service. So there is a limitation that comes along with it, but it is free for everyone to use.
And finally, Susan asks, can I bring in .kml files generated by my APC system?
KML files, maybe. You may have to convert those to shape files, which you could do in ArcGIS, but maybe you can bring them in directly. Actually, I haven't tried, but you might be able to.
Okay.
Right.